June 1945, Camp Hearn, Texas. The prairie sun beat down like a hammer. 24-year-old Clara Schmidt stepped off the transport truck, wrists still marked from the ropes, bracing for the cruelty she'd been promised her whole life. Savage guards, starvation rations, public humiliation. Her grandmother's final words echoed, "Meet your end with dignity. Do not let them shatter you." But when the dinner bell rang that first night, Clara froze. On the tin tray before her sat a generous portion of roasted pork, creamed potatoes, buttered corn, a soft roll, and pears and syrup. She whispered in disbelief, "This is how the Americans feed their prisoners?" An older prisoner slapped the fork from her hand. "Don't touch it. It must be poisoned." But then Lieutenant Evelyn Sato sat down across from them, cut into her own identical plate, and took a bite. "It's the Geneva Convention. Your rations are the same as our own troops." Everything Clara had been taught was a lie, and that single meal would shatter her entire world. But before we dive in, if you want to hear more incredible untold stories that history tried to bury, smash that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I love seeing how far these forgotten truths can travel. The prairie heat seemed to absorb all sound. That was the first thing Clara Schmidt noticed as the transport truck's engine cut and the tailgate dropped with a metallic clang. No birdsong, no wind, just heat pressing down like a physical weight, turning the air to glass. She stepped onto Texas soil with her wrists still bearing the rope burns from the journey, blinking against sunlight so bright it felt like punishment. 24 years old, and certain, she was walking toward her death. The other women climbed down behind her, 12 in all, ranging from nurses to clerks to signals clerks like herself. They'd been captured in different places, processed through different camps, but they all carried the same rigid posture, spine straight, chins level. The Führer's daughters, trained to die with dignity rather than beg for mercy from savages. Clara's grandmother had gripped her face in the Leipzig railway station 3 months ago, fingers like talons. "They will starve you, beat you, parade you through streets for their amusement. Do not let them shatter you. Meet your end with dignity." She'd believed every word. But the woman walking toward them now wore a pressed uniform with lieutenant's bars and carried a clipboard instead of a rifle. Japanese-American, Clara realized with a jolt. Dark hair pinned severely, expression neutral as carved stone. She stopped 3 paces away and said in flawless German, "I'm Lieutenant Evelyn Sato. Welcome to Camp Hearn. Follow me for processing." No shouting, no dogs, no hands raised to strike. The women exchanged glances, confusion rippling through the group like wind over wheat. Clara felt her chest tighten. This had to be theater. The calm before the real horror began. Processing took an hour. They were assigned bunks in a timber barracks that smelled of creosote and dry earth. Clara stared at the thin mattress on her cot, the first actual bed she'd touched in weeks, and felt her throat close. A bar of simple white soap sat on the pillow, clean as a lie. She picked it up, turned it over in her hands, waiting for it to dissolve into ash. "Where are the whips?" whispered Elise Bauer, the youngest at 20, her voice cracking. "Where are the dogs?" No one answered. They were all thinking it. The dinner bell rang at 1800 hours. Clara filed into the mess hall with the others, shoulders tight, preparing for watery gruel or moldy bread. The smell hit her like a fist. Roasting meat, yeast, butter, coffee, real coffee. Her stomach clenched so hard she nearly doubled over. Frank Miller, the camp mess sergeant, stood behind the serving line with a ladle and an easy smile. He said something in English she didn't catch, then gestured at the trays. Clara held hers out with shaking hands. He piled it high. A generous portion of roasted pork, pink in the center, creamed potatoes with a pat of butter melting into gold, buttered corn, a roll that gave off steam when she touched it, pears in heavy syrup. Clara stared. Her hands wouldn't stop trembling. "This is how the Americans feed their prisoners?" She whispered in German, the words barely audible. Marguerite Richter materialized at her elbow. 41, hard as winter, a former SAS auxiliary who'd been barking orders since the transport. She slapped the fork from Clara's hand. It clattered to the floor. "Don't touch it," Margareta hissed. "It must be poisoned. They want us to think we're safe." Then she drew a finger across her throat, the gesture sharp and final. "They're playing with us, testing us. The real punishment comes later." Clara's pulse hammered in her ears. It made sense. Of course it made sense. Everything she'd been taught said Americans were barbaric, vengeful, cruel. You didn't feed your enemies pork unless you were fattening them for slaughter. But then Lieutenant Sato sat down across the table from them. She set her own tray down, identical to theirs, down to the last kernel of corn, and cut into her pork with calm precision. She took a bite, chewed, swallowed, met Clara's eyes, and said in that same level German, "It's the Geneva Convention, Article 26. Prisoners of war receive the same rations as the captor nation's troops. You can check the Red Cross report if you'd like. It's posted in the barracks." Clara's entire world tilted on its axis. If they lied about the food, about this, what else was a lie? That night, long after lights out, Clara pulled the cold piece of pork from her pocket. She'd saved it without thinking, hidden it in her sleeve like contraband. She lifted it to her mouth in the darkness, feeling the weight of Margaret's glare from across the room. It tasted like treason. It tasted like truth. And she couldn't stop the tears that came after. By the end of the first week, Clara had earned 3 cents. She held the camp scrip in her palm like it might evaporate. Thin paper vouchers printed with the Camp Hearn seal, more money than she'd ever possessed in Germany. The work wasn't hard. Laundry duty meant hauling wet uniforms from industrial washers to clotheslines that stretched across the compound, her hands turning pink in the hot water. 8 hours a day, 90 cents per day. The math felt absurd. At the canteen on Saturday, she bought toothpaste, a tube of Colinos, writing paper, and a pencil. She stood at the counter, touching each item as if they might burn her, waiting for someone to laugh and snatch them away. But the clerk, a bored corporal who barely looked up, just took her scrip and waved her along. Elise Bauer bought cigarettes. She didn't smoke, but she clutched the pack like a talisman, proof that this strange reality hadn't dissolved yet. Clara watched Lieutenant Sato constantly now, studied her the way you'd study a locked door, searching for the mechanism that would explain how it worked. Evie moved through the camp with mechanical efficiency, clipboard always in hand, enforcing rules with the same flat consistency, whether the violation was minor or serious. No raised voices, no favoritism. When a guard tried to skip a POW's dessert ration as a joke, Evie reassigned him to night watch for a month. When Marguerite hoarded bread in her footlocker, Evie confiscated it without comment and logged the incident in triplicate. What Clara couldn't understand was the restraint. Evie should hate them, should want them to suffer. Her parents were imprisoned in some camp in California. Clara had overheard guards talking about it, and her brother had died fighting at Monte Cassino. Died proving his loyalty to a country that locked up his family anyway. Yet here she stood, enforcing the Geneva Convention like it was scripture, treating enemy women with a care that felt more disturbing than cruelty ever could. One evening, Evie found Clara sitting alone in the barracks, staring at a blank piece of writing paper. The others had gone to the recreation hall for a film screening, but Clara couldn't make herself go. Couldn't make herself do anything but sit with the pencil hovering over the page. "Writer's block?" Evie asked in German, her accent precise and oddly formal. Clara looked up, startled. "I don't know what to say to my family, if they're even—" She couldn't finish. "The truth is usually a good start. The truth is, I'm being treated better here than I ever was at home." The words came out sharp, almost angry. "The truth is, I eat pork roast while they starve. How do I write that?" Evie was quiet for a long moment. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small worn paperback, a German-English dictionary. The cover was soft at the edges. She set it on the bunk beside Clara. "Thought you might want to read the convention yourself," Evie said. "Article by article. It's not mercy, it's law. There's a difference." Clara picked up the dictionary slowly, feeling its weight. "Why are you doing this? Doing what? Treating us like we're human." Evie's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. "Because the law says you are. And the minute I stop following the law, I become what I'm fighting against." She turned to leave, then paused at the door. "Your family would want to know you're alive. Write that first. Everything else can wait." After she left, Clara opened the dictionary. The pages smelled like ink and old paper. She started with the basics. Hello, thank you, please. But she found herself drawn to other words. Restraint, justice, mercy. She sounded them out quietly, testing their shapes in her mouth. By the end of the second week, she'd begun teaching English to the younger POWs in exchange for their dessert rations. Elise was her best student, absorbing vocabulary with frightening speed. Even Margaret showed up once, standing at the back of the barracks with her arms crossed, listening, but never participating. "Why are you learning their language?" Margarete demanded one night, her voice cutting through the darkness after lights out. Clara didn't answer right away. She thought about the dictionary, about Evie's mechanical kindness that somehow hurt more than cruelty, about the pork that tasted like treason. "Because I want to understand what they're saying," she finally replied. "When they tell us why." "There is no why. There's only waiting until we can go home." But Clara wasn't sure anymore what home even meant, or if there was anything left to go back to. 3 months passed like water through fingers. Clara learned to sleep without startling awake, learned to eat without checking the food for poison first, learned the English words for sunrise and coffee and good morning, and how to say them to Frank Miller when he handed her breakfast with that same gentle smile. The camp settled into a routine of work details and mail call and evening recreation, until the day Lieutenant Sato gathered all the women and marched them to the camp theater without explanation. The room was small and close, folding chairs arranged in rows facing a white screen. A projector sat in the back, already threaded and humming. Evie stood at the front, her face carved from stone. "VE Day was last month," she said in German, her voice carrying no inflection whatsoever. "The war in Europe is over. Germany has surrendered. What you're about to see are newsreels from the Allied liberation of the concentration camps. You will watch all of it. There will be no leaving early." Clara's stomach dropped. Beside her, Elise had gone white as paper. The lights dimmed. The projector clicked to life. Bergen-Belsen appeared first. Mountains of skeletal bodies stacked like cordwood. Limbs twisted at impossible angles. living prisoners who looked like animated corpses, hollow-eyed and swaying. British soldiers wearing masks against the stench, using bulldozers to push the dead into mass graves because there were too many to bury any other way. Then Dachau, Buchenwald, Auschwitz. Clara made it through 15 minutes before she stumbled up the aisle and out the side door, hand clamped over her mouth. She barely made it to the edge of the building before her stomach emptied violently onto the dry earth. She retched until there was nothing left, then kept retching, her body trying to expel something that couldn't be vomited away. She didn't hear Evie approach, didn't know she was there until the lieutenant's shadow fell across the ground beside her. "Did you know?" Evie asked quietly. Clara wiped her mouth with shaking hands. "No," her voice came out, barely recognizable. We didn't. I never saw anything like that. I was just a signals clerk. I just relayed messages and coordinates." She stopped because the excuse died in her throat. "But I should have asked. I should have wondered why they needed so many trains, so many camps. I should have what? Asked questions, looked harder, refused?" The words felt pathetic even as she spoke them. What could one signals clerk have done? What difference would her single refusal have made? But she'd never even tried. Evie was silent for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice had lost its mechanical edge. "My parents lost their grocery store in Seattle. Everything they'd built in 30 years, gone in a week. My brother enlisted to prove his loyalty, to show we were real Americans. He died at Monte Cassino with a bullet in his chest and a flag on his coffin." She looked up at the stars beginning to emerge in the darkening sky. "I wanted to hate every single one of you. I wanted you to suffer the way my family suffered, the way those people in the camps suffered." Clara couldn't breathe, couldn't move. "But the law said you're human," Evie continued. "The Geneva Convention said you get the same food I eat, the same medical care, the same basic dignity. So I had to act like it was true, even when I didn't feel it, even when every part of me wanted to." She stopped, swallowed hard. Restraint isn't kindness. It's the only thing standing between civilization and that. She gestured back toward the theater, where the projector was still running. Clara wanted to say something, wanted to apologize or explain or beg forgiveness. But what apology could possibly be big enough? What words existed for this? 2 weeks later, the women organized a concert in the recreation hall. Someone had found an old upright piano. Evie played badly, hitting wrong notes and laughing at her own mistakes, while the German women sang folk songs their grandmothers had taught them. Nothing political, just music about mountains and rivers and seasons changing. Even Margaret softened that night, pulling out photographs of her children and passing them around with trembling hands. For one strange hour, they weren't prisoners and guards, just women trying to remember what it felt like to be human. That night, Clara wrote another letter home. She'd written dozens by now, all unanswered. She folded the paper carefully and addressed it in her neatest handwriting. "I am safe. They treat us well. I hope you are alive to read this." She never expected a reply, but 3 days later, the Red Cross envelope arrived. The envelope was thin, too thin. Clara held it between her fingers in the barracks, feeling the weight of absence inside it. Red Cross letterhead, official stamps. Her hands wouldn't stop shaking as she tore it open. The words swam on the page. She had to read them 3 times before they made sense. Her mother and younger brother were dead, killed in the February firebombing of Dresden. Her father was missing, last seen in the chaos of the Soviet advance, presumed dead. Her grandmother had hanged herself in the garden shed 2 days after the surrender, unable to face the ruin of everything she'd believed in. Clara folded the letter with mechanical precision, creased the edges sharp, and placed it in her footlocker beneath the German-English dictionary. Then she lay down on her bunk and stared at the ceiling, feeling absolutely nothing. The nothing lasted 3 days. She stopped eating. The food on her tray, still generous, still hot, looked obscene. While her mother had burned alive, Clara had been gaining weight. While her brother had starved in the rubble, she'd been sleeping on a mattress. While her grandmother had chosen death over dishonor, Clara had been learning English and singing folk songs with the enemy. Frank Miller noticed first. He approached her table at dinner, concern creasing his broad face. "You need to eat something, miss. Please." She stared at the pork on her plate. It might as well have been made of ash. That night, Margaret cornered her in the barracks. The older woman's face was hard as flint, eyes blazing with something between fury and vindication. "I told you," she hissed in rapid German. "I told you they were playing games. Now you see it, don't you? They fed you while your family died. They made you comfortable while Germany burned. They turned you into a traitor." "I never," Clara started, but her voice wouldn't work properly. "You befriended her, that Japanese woman. You learned their language. You laughed at their piano playing." Marguerite's voice rose, sharp enough to cut. "You chose them over your own people, over your own blood. That's not, you're a collaborator, a disgrace. Your grandmother killed herself because she knew what honor looked like. And you," Margaret spat at her feet, "you make me sick." Something broke loose inside Clara's chest. She launched herself at Margaret, fists swinging wildly, screaming words that didn't form sentences. They crashed into a bunk, tangled together. Elise and 2 others trying to pull them apart. Clara felt a fist connect with her jaw, tasted copper, and didn't care. She wanted to hurt something, wanted to make the world hurt the way she hurt. Guards flooded the barracks. Strong hands dragged her away. She was still screaming when they locked her in the isolation cell, a small, concrete room with a cot and a bucket and nothing else. The silence pressed down like a physical weight. For 3 days, she sat in that cell and faced the question she'd been running from since the newsreels, since the letter, since the first bite of pork 3 months ago. Did being treated with mercy make her complicit? Did surviving while her family died mean she'd betrayed them? Was gratitude the same as treason? On the 3rd day, Evie came to the cell door. She didn't unlock it, just sat on the floor outside, back against the bars, and spoke through the gap. "I got the report about your family," Evie said quietly. "I'm sorry." Clara said nothing. What was there to say? "You didn't kill them," Evie continued. "You didn't drop the bombs or start the war or vote for any of it. You were 24 years old and following orders because that's what you were taught to do. I should have been there, to die with them. Would that have made it better?" "It would have been honest," Clarice's voice cracked. "Instead, I'm here, safe, fed, alive, while they—" She couldn't finish. Evie was quiet for a long moment. "You didn't choose to be captured. You didn't choose to be fed. But you can choose what to do with the fact that you survived." She stood, brushing dust from her uniform. People are going to need bridges. Between languages, between enemies, between the world that was and the world that's coming. You can be that, or you can let the guilt eat you alive. But either way, your family is still gone. And you're still here. She walked away, footsteps echoing down the corridor. Clara curled up on the thin mattress and finally let herself cry. Not the silent tears she'd shed before, but great, wrenching sobs that tore through her chest and left her gasping. She cried until she was empty, until there was nothing left but the terrible, unbearable fact of her own continued existence, and the question of what to do with it. They released Clara on a Wednesday morning. She walked back to the barracks with her jaw still tender and her hands still shaking, and found the other women preparing for repatriation. The camp was processing them in waves, sending them back to occupied Germany on transport ships that would dock in Bremerhaven. Most of the women were terrified. Elise sat on her bunk, clutching a single photograph of her family home, now rubble, and crying silently. "There's nothing to go back to," she whispered. "No house, no family, no jobs. Just ruins and starvation and Russian soldiers." She looked up at Clara with red-rimmed eyes. "At least here we're human. At least here we have beds and food and nobody—" She stopped, unable to finish. Marguerite stood by the window, arms crossed, staring out at the prairie. "We should have stayed prisoners," she said bitterly. "It's the only safe place left for us." Clara felt hollow, scooped out. She had no family to return to, no home, no identity beyond the lies she'd been taught, and the mercy she still couldn't fully accept. She moved through the days like a ghost, doing her work assignments mechanically, eating because Evie watched her with those steady, dark eyes until she took at least a few bites. A week after her release from isolation, Evie found her in the laundry room and handed her an envelope. "Red Cross needs a translator. German refugee in Austin is looking for her daughter. Lost track of her somewhere between Leipzig and the Swiss border. I told them you might help." Clara stared at the letter written in shaky German script, a mother's desperate plea full of specific details. The daughter's birth date, the color of her coat, a distinctive scar on her left hand from a kitchen accident. The kind of details only a real mother would know. "I don't know how," Clara started. "You read German, you read English. You understand how systems work now." Evie's voice was matter-of-fact. "It's not redemption, but it's something real." Clara took the letter. She spent 3 hours that evening carefully translating it, adding notes about where to search, which agencies to contact, what paperwork would be needed. She walked it back to Evie's office after lights out, slid it under the door, and went back to her bunk, feeling something she couldn't name. 2 days later, another letter arrived, then another. Word had spread somehow. There was a German POW at Camp Hearn who could help with missing persons cases, who understood both languages and could navigate the bureaucratic maze. Clara translated requests, wrote letters, filled out forms, small acts that felt inadequate against the ocean of suffering, but real nonetheless. One evening, Evie brought her a follow-up. The Austin mother had found her daughter in a displaced persons camp near Nuremberg. They'd been reunited. The daughter was alive. Clara read the thank-you letter 3 times, then pressed her palm against her mouth to stop the sob that wanted to escape. One person, one small thread reconnected in the vast, torn fabric of Europe. It shouldn't have mattered. It shouldn't have meant anything. But it did. A Red Cross worker visited the camp 2 weeks before repatriation began. A tall woman with efficient movements and kind eyes, recruiting staff for displaced persons relief operations. They needed German speakers desperately, people who could help survivors navigate aid systems, fill out paperwork, locate missing relatives, translate trauma into forms that bureaucracies could process. "It's not glamorous work," the woman said, addressing the gathered POWs in careful German. "Long hours, difficult conditions, heartbreaking cases, but if you want to help rebuild, this is where it starts." Clara sat in the back of the room, Evie standing against the wall nearby. Their eyes met. Evie nodded once, barely perceptible. That night, Clara pulled out the German-English dictionary and found the word she needed. Purpose. She sounded it out quietly, testing the shape of it. When the Red Cross worker asked for volunteers the next morning, Clara raised her hand. Marguerite watched from across the room, her expression unreadable. "You're still choosing them," she said later, "still turning your back on your own people." "No," Clara replied quietly. "I'm choosing the people who need help. That includes my own people. It includes everyone." The day before repatriation, all the women were asked to sign statements about their treatment for Red Cross documentation. Margaret refused, still clinging to her belief that it had all been theater, manipulation, a form of psychological warfare. But Clara sat at the table with a pen and wrote in careful English, each word deliberate. "I came expecting cruelty. I was given pork roast. I expected savagery. I was given law. I do not understand mercy, but I witnessed it. I will spend the rest of my life learning to pass it forward." She signed her name at the bottom and slid the paper across to Evie, who read it without expression. Then looked up and held Clara's gaze for a long moment. "Good luck," Evie said simply. Thank you for following this story to the end. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel to join us in more stories like this. If you want to watch another story, click the video on screen. I promise you'll love it.